Still hasn't gone off?
It's off.
Again there.
Oh, no, that's there.
And now
Got
there.
cleared up, though.
Yes, I think that, yes. It's there. So we are recording again.
So I'm just saying that what you're saying about the economy being so difficult
Yes, it does.
and people not able to. When I was teaching at Lehman College, I taught 9 credits. 3 days a week I had to be on campus. Not full time. 9 credits, like 9 hours. Maybe I was I was active. I was on campus longer because I wanted to be active with the students. But I had another not full-time job, but another job working as a clinical psychologist in the public schools.
Mm-hmm.
I could have 2 jobs. You know, there was that much time. And it was not hard. I had just gotten my PhD. I had 2 jobs. I had a small private, I worked like crazy. And there were those opportunities, and there was lots of time. I could go for a weekend to Washington, D.C. to demonstrate and be arrested and come back 2 days later. And, it was a completely different...
They learned, so now...
What?
The system learned now.
They learned that they had to tie us up so much. So people don't have enough money, they don't have enough jobs, and the level of stress is so high. I don't remember that level of stress. Of course, I was much younger, but I also remember being able to travel, and it wasn't expensive. When things got too stressful here, I would go to Mexico for 2 weeks. I remember going to Mexico at the drop of a hat and having a chance to get away from things. It wasn't expensive. It was $300 to fly to Mexico. Yeah. I could stay in places cheap. We were hippies. There were a lot of ways that you could live. So the whole atmosphere was very different. And I'm glad you raised that because people sometimes here forget that.
Yeah.
What a difference it makes.
Yeah.
And that so many people don't have jobs.
That's why we don't have a big student movement in the United States anymore. So
the students have to work to support themselves while they're students because they're going to be in debt for the rest of their lives. I mean, that kind of debt. I went to Barnard College, which is an elite school, for $800 a year tuition. That's what we paid. My parents were middle class, working class really at that time. They had a little more money maybe, but they could afford $800. They couldn't have afforded $30,000. I wouldn't have gone to school like that.
Maybe more now.
Yeah, I couldn't have gone to school like that, but $800 they could afford. My graduate program, which was at Columbia, cost $2,000, the whole program, the PhD program.
2,000?
Because it was 2 years of classes, and I paid that. Then there was a year of an internship where you were paid for that, so you didn't have to pay. As a psychologist, you had an internship.
My God.
And then the last year, to write my dissertation, I got a fellowship. So the total amount for the 4 years, it took longer to get the PhD, but for the 4 years that I was actually actively involved as a student, was $2,000.
My goodness.
People don't realize that. So there was someone like me. My parents had never gone to school. I'm not talking about college or high school. They never went to school. My mother went to elementary school. My father never went to school. And here I was graduating from an elite university and an elite college. And they could afford to do that. It was really that kind of atmosphere. And you had a sense that capitalism was going to be successful forever. Nobody would have predicted the shit we're looking at in this country now, the number of fires, the number of homeless, the number of unemployed, the number of everything about it. The schools the schools have always been terrible. Anyway, so I think that's true. That's a big part of why there's no movement. I also remember that in 1970, when the United States invaded Cambodia, and there were demonstrations all over the place. Demonstrations, and Banks of America were burnt down, and people were just unbelievable, the level of protest all over the country. And then Kent State happened, and Jackson State. and 4 students were killed at Kent State and 2 at Jackson State, and probably more in the South, black students. And a student of mine, who I'm still close with today, said to me, okay, that's it. I'm not going to any more demonstrations. If they're going to kill us, I'm not going to a demonstration. So for the first time, white people, saw that they were willing to kill. They killed 4 white people in broad daylight for being militant around, and after that had an effect too.
For being exercising their
free speech,
right.
Yeah. So people began realizing that those rights, which black people always know and experience, are not necessarily guaranteed to white people either.
Yeah.
And if you demonstrate too hard or protest too much, these were middle-class white kids at Kent State. I mean, one of them lived on the Upper West Side, and I remember the streets were packed with cars for a funeral down at Riverside Plaza or something like that. But it was like shocking to people. And now, of course, we know what happens to protesters at these demonstrations, at these Black Lives Matter demonstrations. The number of people who've remained in prison, who are in prison to this day for those demonstrations, because they round people up. And we are living in a more openly fascist state now than was the reality in the 70s.
Yeah, definitely.
You know, it's definitely, and now with the Supreme Court that is as reactionary as it is, and a cowardly Democratic Party, or it's not even just cowardice. I mean, Democratic Party that's showing its true colors of collaboration, with the Republicans, that's. Oh, and the very important thing that people are not aware of. I have a history of working with the Congressional Black Caucus.
That's another issue.
Starting during the war in Vietnam. In the war in Vietnam, Ron Dellums, who had been, I think, in the Communist Party at some point, Ron Dellums had a staff person, Carletta Walker, I think was her name. Carletta something. Beautiful sister. So Ron Dellums came from California. He was clearly, they had the Congressional Black Caucus. I'll try to make it brief. The Congressional Black Caucus, during the war in Vietnam, held hearings on the criminality of the war in Vietnam, because Congress wouldn't do it. So they call them rump meetings, where they call a meeting, they use the congressional facility, but it's not an official meeting. It's not recognized by the Congress. So they had hearings that were excellent. I have the book of the hearing, what they found on the crimes committed by the American government, U.S. government in Vietnam. Mm-hmm. And in it was so it was Ron Dellums, Conyers, and believe it or not, nobody will believe this, but Ed Koch, the former mayor of New York, who was a liberal at that time, mm-hmm. and Bella Abzug. Do you remember her? Mm-hmm. And then someone else, I think. But anyway, they ran these hearings. Okay, jump forward to 1995, almost 25 years later. I had just joined the Mumia movement, and I said, I'm going to try to get the Congressional Black Caucus to do something about Mumia's case. And people looked at me and said, you're crazy, And Pam said she thought to herself, saying this on the tape, she thought to herself, it doesn't sound possible to me, but you never know. John Africa taught us that different people can do different things, and maybe something we can't do, someone else can do. So she said, let her try. She sounds like she knows what she's talking about. Well, lo and behold, in a period of 2 months, a little less than 2 months, I succeeded, with the help of originally Ron Dellums, and then they introduced me to Mumia's congressman in Philadelphia, because they said you have to have Mumia's congressman do this. Well, Mumia's congressman knew Pam, and he had already, his whole family was political. So they decided, they agreed to work with me to put out a statement. And to make a long story short, they put out a phenomenal statement asking for Mumia not to be executed. He was scheduled to be executed. Asking for them to be a civil rights investigation, and saying that there was even evidence that he was innocent. Shocking, coming from a congressional body. 25 people in the Congressional Black Caucus signed the letter.
Oh my goodness.
25 people. One white person from the Upper West Side who I knew because he was active in a synagogue that I sometimes attended. So I knew about him. And I went to see him, and he gave us some very good advice and then signed the letter, one white person, and a few Latino people. And they sent it to the Attorney General of the United States, Janet Reno, asking for all this. I can show you a copy.
That was when Bill Clinton.
Yes.
Janet Reno.
So we had, now, that's 1995. Jump forward to today.
Mm-hmm.
To show how bad things have gotten.
Yeah.
The Congressional Black Caucus is now led by one person who, they have very high positions in Congress now, the Congressional Black Caucus.
Mm.
One is head of the Judiciary Committee, the other is head of Security, Armed Forces, some other position. Both support U.S. imperialism totally. They both, one of them was said recently, one criticized black people for not supporting the United States vis-a-vis Ukraine and the Soviet Union. How could we not support this government as it's speaking out against Russia? So one of them denounced black people who've not supported the United States position on Russia. The other one said, look, when push comes to shove, we have to say that the United States is the best place in the world for black people to live. These are the two leaders in the Congressional Black Caucus. So look at that from 1995 today. And you know what happened to them? So this doesn't happen spontaneously. How did they all move to the right? How come? If I tried to bring that same letter that I got in 1995,
Mm-hmm.
now they gave a woman to work with me full time on that letter.
Oh my God.
A woman, his wife, Mumia's congressman's wife, worked with me on that letter. I had that letter within about a month. I started thinking about it 2 months early, but I think, anyway, June 30th, I'll remember it to the day I died, June 30th, 1995, I got this letter. And so, in the 1980s, they were bought off. The Congressional Black Caucus was given a lot of money to have a building, their own building. They used to have like the second-rate offices, congressmen, people like, so they were always treated like shit. So they had second.
So now they're
got
VIP.
They got a building, their own building right near the Congress, and they have a yearly conference at some fancy place in North Carolina or somewhere, which they pay for. It was on the budget. So the Congress people now are so privileged, and they're useless. They're absolutely useless. What's his name? Glenn Ford used to go on and on and on about the Black Caucus. Black Caucus has been the major supporters of U.S. in relation to Israel.
Yeah.
Major. And, Glenn Ford used to go on and on about this, and I remember when they were bought off. So that happened like that. It didn't just, so like you say, the loans, people having to work so hard, the cutbacks in time, in leisure, didn't come by chance, and the Congressional Black Caucus didn't simply one day become reactionary. No. It was a strategic plan. They were the voice of morality in Congress, the only progressive people.
It was a progressive process.
And they were able to get that and undermine that whole process. By the time he died, John Conyers, who had been one of the radicals, kept his mouth shut.
Yeah.
So, anyway, I think we've made our point about the connection, the interconnection between what happens around the world and what happens in this country, and how
Definitely.
the struggle has to be one that's united. And when the progressive movement decides, whether in Nicaragua or El Salvador or Venezuela or Cuba, to support the empire, that's a disaster. When this movement is not clear about who our allies are and what's progressive and who our enemy is, always the United States empire, and when democracy now supports the empire and sees the empire as more moral than those who are fighting the empire, we're in trouble. We're in trouble. So good people can be misled. Good people can fall for the bullshit. Good people can really harm our revolutionary clarity, integrity, message. Anything that we try to do that's principled will not be able to stand the kind of ignorance that we have. The kind of ignorance that we have very often.
Yeah, definitely. I think that it's important also to see that at the same time that USA economy and the working condition in the United States have been getting deteriorated, also the same thing has been happening in South America.
Oh, worse.
So it's
worse.
And it's something that has been progressive. And of course, if the United States creating condition to basically benefit the USA corporation interests.
The corporate, the 1%.
Yeah.
The Wall Street demonstrations did succeed, I think, in getting across the message of the 1% versus the 99%. I thought that was one of the great accomplishments of a progressive movement. I don't think, Bloomberg, the viciousness with which Bloomberg attacked the Wall Street sit-ins was, to me, so... When Bloomberg was mayor, I was always amazed at the openness of his viciousness.
Yeah.
Right? There was a Democratic Party convention or Republican, one of the conventions. He arrested all those people who protested. He put them in animal stalls. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
In animal stalls. Then at Wall Street, they brought in the middle of the night or whatever, at some weird hour, they brought in and beat the shit out of the demonstrators and wiped it off. Why? Because they said this property belonged to a private owner, And Bloomberg, and then of course stop and frisk. So I think I loved when Bloomberg was mayor because it was all so obvious. But he managed to clean up his act enough. I loved when he was challenged when he ran for president.
But anyway, we need still, with the challenge are even bigger now, and we still have to, despite everything.
We have to.
We have to be
Right.
still optimistic.
Yeah, we do.
And
we
to
do.
continue the fight.
Well, I always say, look, we've been working on Mumia's case for 40 years. Mumia's been in prison for 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
And he was framed, and all the evidence shows that he's innocent. And after 40 years, we managed to not have him killed. So they tried to kill him several times, once legally, twice legally, and then once medically. So they tried to kill him. We managed to save his life, our movement. So you could look at the fact that we did not succeed in getting him out. He's still not out.
Yeah.
But the other side is not only that we managed to save his life, but also that we built a movement that was amazing.
Yeah.
And I think that movement is here to stay because the next generation of activists is taking over now. And they're as passionate as we were, if not more. And I feel the building of movements is still the answer.
Yeah.
is still the answer. And maybe we can't get a million people out in the streets, but we have cadre that are really committed in the Mumia movement and in working for other political prisoners, other people. So I'm often, it depends on which day you get me, whether I look at the more negative or I look at the more positive side of what we've done all these years.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't have given it up for anything. I wouldn't not do it. If I had the chance again, I would do it again. Que viva!
Viviremos y venceremos. That's what Chávez said.
What was the first one?
Viviremos
Viviremos
y venceremos.
venceremos. Venceremos, I know, but viviremos means we live, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the things is I never learned Spanish. One of the self-criticisms.
It's okay.
There wasn't time. There wasn't time to spend time learning Spanish when there was everything else to do, and so many people speak English, and we take advantage of that imperial reality. So, all right, William, thank you very, very much. Thank you for your work. May the struggle really...
No, thank you for your work.
You didn't talk about my cooking.
Oh, yes, I always come here to get my dinner. But I think that today...
You earned your keep.
I only got coffee.
Let me go cook.
I'm getting all angry now.
Okay, put everything away and I'll cook in the meantime. So I think that was great. I think that was good, William,
Yeah.
don't you?
Yeah, I think so.